Have you ever gotten a phone call that made your stomach drop before the other person even finished the first sentence? That's exactly what happened to me on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. My name is Ryan Mercer. I live about 20 minutes away from my 72-year-old mother, Margaret. After my father passed away 8 years ago, Mom stayed in the same house they'd owned for more than 3 decades. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even fancy, but it was her home. And apparently, that bothered one person in our neighborhood. The president of our HOA, a woman named Linda Crawford. The trouble started the moment Linda moved into the community 6 months earlier. She acted like she owned every street, every sidewalk, and every house. If a trash can stay outside 10 minutes too long, she'd complain. If someone parked slightly over the curb, she'd complain. If a flower bed wasn't perfectly trimmed, she'd complain. Most people rolled their eyes and ignored her. My mother tried to be polite. That was her mistake. One afternoon, Linda knocked on Mom's door and introduced herself. Mom offered her lemonade. Linda spent 15 minutes criticizing the color of the shutters. Mom laughed it off. But after that day, Linda seemed obsessed with her house. Letters started arriving. Violation notices. Warnings. Fees. The reasons became more ridiculous every month. Bird feeder too visible. Garden decorations not approved. Mailbox color inconsistent with community standards. Mom paid some of them just to avoid stress. I kept telling her to fight them. She always gave the same answer. Ryan, I don't want trouble. Unfortunately, trouble wanted her. 3 months later, Linda appeared at another HOA meeting carrying a stack of papers. Several neighbors later told me she pointed directly at my mother's property during the meeting. She claimed the house was lowering property values. Nobody agreed with her, but that didn't stop her. The following weeks became increasingly strange. Linda drove past Mom's house several times every day. Neighbors noticed. One even caught her taking photographs. Another reported seeing her measuring sections of the front yard. Mom felt uncomfortable, but tried not to worry. Then came the phone call, the one I'll never forget. I was at work when my cell phone rang. Mom rarely called during the day. The second I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was shaking. Ryan, there are people here. I immediately stood up. What people? They say they're here because the HOA ordered me to leave. For a second, I thought I'd heard her wrong. What? They said the property is under enforcement action. My heart nearly stopped. Mom, who exactly is there? She lowered her voice. Linda. I grabbed my keys. I'm coming right now. Then Mom said something that made me drive faster than I ever had in my life. Ryan. She's standing on my porch smiling. The 20-minute drive felt like 2 hours. Every terrible possibility ran through my head. When I arrived, I saw 3 vehicles parked outside. 1 belonged to Linda. 2 belonged to a private property management company. Mom was standing near her front door. She looked frightened. Linda stood nearby with crossed arms and a satisfied grin. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I walked straight toward them. What's going on? Linda answered before anyone else could. Your mother has received multiple violations. The HOA has begun enforcement procedures. Enforcement procedures don't mean removing someone from their house. Her smile faded slightly. The board has authority. No, it doesn't. One of the property representatives suddenly looked uncomfortable. He asked Linda quietly, do we actually have a court order? Linda ignored him. That told me everything. I demanded documentation. Linda handed me several papers. I read them carefully. Within 30 seconds, I realized something shocking. There was no eviction order, no court judgment, no legal authorization, nothing, just HOA notices. That's it. I looked directly at the property representatives. You realize this woman is trying to remove a 72-year-old homeowner without a court order? Both men exchanged nervous looks. One immediately stepped backward. The other asked Linda again. Ma'am, we were told legal approval had already been obtained. Linda's face turned red. It will be. That wasn't the answer they wanted. The older representative shook his head. We can't participate in this. Then something happened that Linda clearly didn't expect. The neighbors started coming outside, one by one, across the street, next door, down the block. Within minutes, nearly a dozen residents had gathered. Several had witnessed Linda's behavior for months. and now they were angry. A retired firefighter named Frank stepped forward. "Leave Margaret alone." Another neighbor raised her voice. "She's done nothing wrong." A third neighbor pulled out his phone. "I've got videos of Linda trespassing near this property." For the first time all afternoon, Linda looked nervous. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Because among the neighbors walking toward us was someone Linda absolutely did not want to see. And the moment she recognized him, the color drained from her face. The man walking toward us was Robert Gaines. Most people in the neighborhood knew him, not because he was loud, not because he liked attention, but because for nearly 15 years, Robert had served on the HOA board before retiring 2 years earlier. Unlike Linda, he was respected, and judging by the expression on his face, he wasn't happy. Linda immediately straightened her posture. "Robert," she said, forcing a smile, "this doesn't concern you." Robert didn't even look at her. Instead, he walked directly to my mother. "Margaret, are you all right?" Mom nodded, a little shaken. Robert turned toward Linda. "Good, because what you're doing here is completely unauthorized." The crowd became silent. Linda folded her arms. "You don't know what you're talking about." Robert pulled a folder from under his arm. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." That confidence instantly changed the mood. The neighbors leaned closer. Even the property management representatives stopped walking away. They wanted to hear this. Robert opened the folder. "I attended last month's board meeting." Linda's expression froze. "I also requested copies of every enforcement action involving Margaret's property." Now she looked worried. Robert continued. "There was never a board vote authorizing removal from his property." Several people gasped. Linda immediately interrupted. "That's not true." Robert held up several documents. "It is true. I have the meeting records." The silence became uncomfortable. Then one of the property representatives stepped forward. "Ma'am, did you tell us the board approved this?" Linda didn't answer. That was answer enough. The representative looked furious. "We accepted this job based on information you provided." A woman from across the street shook her head. "This is unbelievable." But Robert wasn't finished. Not even close. He removed another document. "This gets worse." Linda's confidence completely disappeared. I noticed her glancing toward her car, almost like she wanted to leave. Robert pointed toward my mother's property. 3 months ago, Linda proposed purchasing this lot. Everyone looked confused, including me. "What?" Robert nodded. "She approached Margaret privately." I turned to my mother. Mom looked embarrassed. "She offered to buy the house." The crowd erupted. "What? When?" Mom sighed. "About 3 months ago." I couldn't believe it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I said no and thought that was the end of it." Apparently, it wasn't. Robert continued. "When Margaret refused to sell, Linda began filing violation reports." The crowd became noticeably louder. People were angry now, really angry. One neighbor stepped forward. "Are you saying all those violations started after the house offer was rejected?" Robert nodded. "Exactly." The pattern was obvious. Even the property representatives looked stunned. One of them turned directly toward Linda. "You used us to pressure a homeowner into leaving?" Linda's face turned bright red. "That's ridiculous." But nobody believed her anymore. Then Frank, the retired firefighter, spoke up. "I've lived here 22 years. He pointed toward my mother's home. "That house has looked exactly the same for years." Several neighbors agreed. One woman raised her hand. "Linda fined me after I defended Margaret at a meeting." Another neighbor spoke. "She fined me for parking in my own driveway." A third neighbor added. "She threatened legal action because my grandson's basketball hoop was visible." Suddenly, everyone had a story. The complaints started pouring out, one after another. The crowd wasn't defending my mother anymore. They were exposing a pattern, and Linda knew it. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. Then something happened that nobody expected. A police cruiser pulled onto the street. The neighborhood became silent. An officer stepped out and approached the gathering. Apparently, several neighbors had called after seeing what was happening. The officer asked a simple question. "Who requested this enforcement action?" Every eye turned toward Linda. She swallowed hard. The officer reviewed the paperwork. It took him less than 2 minutes. Then he looked directly at her. "There's no legal authority here to remove this homeowner." Linda tried arguing. The officer wasn't interested. In fact, He looked irritated, especially after learning an elderly woman had been pressured while home alone. The property management representatives immediately distanced themselves. One of them apologized to my mother. We were given inaccurate information. Mom nodded politely. That's who she was. Even after everything. The officer eventually instructed everyone to leave the property, including Linda. And that's when the crowd did something I'll never forget. Nobody left. Not immediately. Instead, neighbors gathered around my mother, checking on her, offering support, making sure she felt safe. For years, she'd worried she was alone after losing my father. But that day proved she wasn't. Not even close. Over the next few weeks, the story spread through the community. More residents began examining HOA records. More questions surfaced. More complaints appeared. An independent review was eventually requested. Then came the final blow. The investigation revealed multiple violations of HOA procedures under Linda's leadership. Financial records, unauthorized enforcement actions, improper fines, missing documentation. The findings were devastating. Within 2 months, Linda resigned. Within 3 months, she sold her house. And within 4 months, she was gone. Just like that. The woman who spent months trying to force my mother out of her home ended up leaving the neighborhood herself. As for Mom, she's still living in the same house today. The same porch, the same garden, the same front door where Linda once stood smiling. Only now, whenever Mom sits outside with a glass of lemonade, neighbors stop by to talk. And every single one of them knows the same thing. A home isn't controlled by the loudest person in the neighborhood. It's protected by the people willing to stand up for what's right. And on the day HOA Karen tried to evict my elderly mother while she was home alone, the entire neighborhood stood up.